For today's video, I want to share an update on how my older, more established planted tanks are doing using the fish poop fertilization method without the use of any liquid fertilizers or root tabs. I did used to use liquid fertilizers in some of my tanks in the past, but most of them have been fertilizer-free for over a year now, and the only tank I continued dosing for a little bit longer than that was my betta fish tank, and even that hasn't had any fertilizers added to it for around 6 months. So at this point, if there were going to be any issues with nutrient levels in the tank causing deficiencies in the plants, then they would have shown up and they'd be obvious. I do have a full article explaining how this method works, which I link to in the description, but the core idea is simple. You feed your fish the highest quality foods you can find locally, and I use the fluval bug bites and hikari ranges as the staples, and then I usually give treats on a Sunday. I chose the fluval and hikari ranges because they tend to have a better ingredient profile, so more nutrition is going into the tank. Not only does this boost the diet quality of my fish, shrimp and snails, but it also ensures that their waste is packed with usable nutrients, similar to how farmers and gardeners use manure. Waste-eating bacteria in the tank then break down that waste, mineralising it, releasing the leftover nutrients into the water column for plants to absorb via their leaves and stems. Many of the popular substrate options in the hobby today have a decent cation exchange capacity, which means they can pull nutrients from the water column and store them for use via plant roots if needed. So this method doesn't just eliminate the ongoing costs for liquid fertilizers and root tabs, it also naturally improves the nutrition of your fish, shrimp and snails. It's also important to note that Josh Sim, the current IAPLC World Champion aquascaper, recently uploaded a video to his channel explaining that he only follows half of the dosing recommendation of liquid fertilizers, and even then he only uses them in very specific situations, and he uses them in tanks injecting CO2. But a lot of people on the planted tank side of the hobby, myself included, don't use CO2 systems, and without those the plant growth is naturally slower, which means their nutrient demand is also lower. So I'm very confident that a lot of people in the planted tank side of the hobby will be perfectly fine using the fish poop fertilization method in their own tanks and help reduce costs and the risk of algae growth. So getting into an update on my tanks, and I'll start with my 40-gallon community tank. This does use fluval stratum as the substrate, but the initial nutrients from this aqua soil would have been used up a long time ago because this tank is coming up to 2 years old now. My Echinodorus cordifolius fluitans has had a few of its leaves melt recently, but this does seem to be localised to that one plant. All of the other Echinodorus varieties in this tank, along with the Anubias, Java Fern and Laganandra, are doing well, and I'm generally happy with how they are grown. I do want to point out that I do add some mulberry and dandelion pellets to this specific tank for my shrimp and snails to eat because they tend to be higher in potassium. These are an absolute nightmare to find here in the UK, so if you can't find them in your areas, simply using actual mulberry or oak leaves or blanched spinach leaves will do the same job, and your shrimp will love them. The reason I do this is because over a year ago my Java Fern started to have issues with pinholes in its leaves, so I started boosting potassium naturally via high potassium foods that my shrimp and snails love, and the plant did improve noticeably. Then, a few months back, I stopped feeding these higher potassium foods just as a test to see what would happen, and my Java Fern leaves did quickly start to develop those small pinholes again. So that did suggest, just like a lot of other people mention, that Java Fern does seem to have a higher than average potassium requirement for healthy growth. So I have started to add these foods back to the tank, and I'm going to start using actual leaf litter such as oak leaves and mulberry leaves next year. It's also worth pointing out that this is my highest bio-load tank since it's got the most fish in it, and there's plenty of food going into this every single day to fuel healthy plant growth. That said, this specific tank is full of slow-growing plants which don't need much nutrients, but as you can see there's very little algae growth in here, showing that the low nutrients left over from the fish poop fertilization method is keeping everything balanced, making sure the plants can grow healthy and reducing any potential algae growth. Moving on, and we get to my Wallstad method guppy tank, which currently houses 4 male guppies and the oldest cherry shrimp colony I own, which currently has around 50 Neocaridina shrimp in it. Since this is a Wohlstad method setup, it means that the tank uses soil as a nutrient layer which is then capped with fine gravel. The tank is over 1.5 years old now, getting close to that 2-year mark, and while some of the micronutrients will still be in the soil helping the plants grow, a lot of the essential nutrients will have dissipated by now. I do want to quickly mention that I did my tank maintenance and removed excess plant growth yesterday for this setup, but you can still see there's plenty of duckweed in here that's doing well, and the other plants are also thriving. Because this is a filterless tank, the plants have a higher chance of being able to use up ammonium directly from the water column, not only to keep the fish and shrimp safe by making sure the water parameters are stable, but it can offer a benefit to the plants as well. That's because in a filtered tank, a lot of that ammonium gets converted through the nitrogen cycle into nitrate very quickly by microorganisms. While aquatic plants can use that nitrate as a nutrient source for healthy growth, it's actually their secondary nitrogen preference behind ammonium, which is closer to the start of the cycle, because once that nitrate is absorbed by the plant, they need to use nitrate assimilation internally to convert it down to ammonium, wasting energy. Now, it is difficult to know how much of a benefit that actually offers, but in a low-tech tank, when you're not injecting CO2, every little helps. Plants can still use that nitrate as a nutrient source. It may just slow things down a little bit, so if you want to use a technical filter in your tank, then crack on. I do it with a lot of my own. As you can see though, the Rotala rotundifolia, Bacopa caroliniana, Cryptocorin becketii petchii, Christmas moss and the duckweed in this tank are all doing very well. The guppies are busy just doing guppy things and are highly active, and the shrimp colony in here were breeding like crazy during the spring and summer months, and although breeding has slowed down, it's just because we're getting closer to the winter and the temperatures are starting to dip. As you can see though, there's no algae growth in this tank because there's no excess nutrients left over for algae to take advantage of by accidentally adding too much liquid fertilizer. As I mentioned back at the start of the video, world champion aquascaper Josh Sims said in a recent video he literally half doses the recommendation on the bottle for his tanks, which use high powered lighting and CO2 systems. So if you're following the 100% recommendation on a liquid fertilizer in a low tech tank without a CO2 system, you are drastically increasing the chances of algae, in my opinion. Moving on, and we get to my pearlweed jungle tank, and I know that this one needs a trim. I simply ran out of time yesterday when I was doing my tank maintenance, but I will give it a trim this coming week and free up more swim space for the Medaka rice fish in here. On the flip side of that though, this overgrowth is an excellent example of how effective the fish poop fertilization method can be, because the pearlweed in this tank needs trimming once per month. Like my guppy tank I just spoke about, this one is also a Wohlstad method setup using soil capped with fine gravel as its substrate, but this one's also over 1.5 years old now, getting very close to that 2-year mark, so again, I'm confident that at least some of the micronutrients in the soil have been used up, so a lot of the nutrients is from the fish poop fertilization method. Now there's a lot of hiding spots in this tank as you can see, but I guess there's around 80 Neocaridina shrimp in here right now, but I am going to split that colony in half soon and move half to a different tank, so I have a backup in case anything goes wrong with this, because it's my 3rd oldest shrimp colony. You can see how well the pearlweed is grown in here, and even down at the lower portions of the plant that don't get much light because all of the pearlweed above it block the light out, it's just thriving and consistently doing well. Just like my other tanks, there's very little algae in here, if any at all, but credit where it's due, pearlweed is a very fast growing plant, so it will easily outcompete algae for nutrients even if you're using something like liquid fertilizer. Moving on, and we get to my betta fish tank, and this current scape of this setup is around 9 months old yet, but the fluval stratum aqua soil in this tank was used in my old betta fish scape as well, so it's really old. A lot of that initial nutrients will simply have dissipated by now. Like I mentioned back at the start, this is also the most recent tank that had liquid fertilizer applied to it, but I'd guess that's at least 6 months old now, and as you can see, the plants are doing very well. The idea for keep adding the liquid fertilizer to this specific tank was that a single betta fish really doesn't produce that much waste, especially when you're feeding high quality foods that it can actually digest efficiently, so I was worried the bio load in this tank may be too low for healthy plant growth. There is a small colony of pink ram's horn snails in here, as well as around 20 Neocaridina shrimp too, which do slightly increase that bioload, but even after 6 months of just being on the fish poop fertilization method, the plants are all doing very well. While a lot of the plants in here are slow growers, there's Limnophilus essiliflora in the back right and Amazon frogbit floating on the surface, which are far faster growers than most aquatic plants, using up a lot of nutrients. Even with those faster growing plants using up a lot of the nutrients, the Eliocharis carpet in the foreground of the tank has been able to get all the nitrogen and other nutrients that it needs to grow and fill in the carpet and spread. And again, you'll notice a lack of algae. There's very little in here, if any at all, because the plants are just out competing it for that available nutrients, so plants grow healthy while there's very little algae to grow. The final established tank that I have where the substrate is old enough for a lot of that initial nutrients to dissipate is my White Cloud Mountain minnow tank. This one is around 15 months old now, but this one is also a room temperature tank, meaning it doesn't have a heater in it, so while it peaks at around 25 degrees Celsius during the summer, during the winter months it drops down to around 18 degrees Celsius or 64 degrees Fahrenheit. At those cooler temperatures, plant metabolism can slow down or even stop due to plant dormancy starting to kick in. Slow plant metabolism outside of those warmer months can theoretically lead to nutrient deficiency symptoms or algae growth in the tank, but as you can see, the tank is holding up really well right now. It is worth noting that I will be switching my White Cloud Mountain minnows over to a temperate fish food during the winter which has low protein content to help reduce the amount of ammonia they produce while water parameters are cooler and the microorganisms in the filter might not be performing optimally for water purification. In all honesty, I'm really not sure how beneficial that is in countering ammonia spikes, but less ammonia and less nitrogen being produced in the tank means there's less for the plants to take up, but like I said, with the cooler water temperatures their metabolism's slower anyway, so they don't need as much nutrients. As you can see in here though, the plants are doing very well. I'm very happy with how it's progressing, and again there's very little algae, if any at all, going on in this tank. So moving away from the updates on my established tanks, and I want to talk about water parameters and nutrient trends across my setups. It's extremely rare that any of my aquariums have issues with toxic ammonia or toxic nitrite levels spiking. On the rare occasion that they have, it's been due to keeper error on my part, usually adding too much food, but that hardly ever happens now. That's because I picked up some affordable measuring spoons designed for chefs to portion out herbs and spices in the food that they are creating to keep everything consistent with the amount of fish I scoop out of the tub and add to my tanks. Because this helps me add the same amount of food to my tanks every single day, it also keeps the bioload in here predictable so I know what the tank can take and where it might have some issues. Because this lets me quickly and easily add the same amount of food to the tanks every day, it keeps the bioload stable and predictable. That said, I have had some phosphate spikes in my 40-gallon community tank. While phosphate at the levels they spike to is completely harmless to my fish, shrimp and snails and plants in this tank, there has been a clear correlation between phosphate levels spiking up and hair algae growth in that tank, so I try to minimise it when possible. I honestly don't think those excess phosphate levels have anything to do with the fish poop fertilization method. Personally, I think it's linked to filter maintenance. As I mentioned, my 40-gallon community tank is my highest bioload tank because it has the most fish in it, and if I don't do filter maintenance at least once per month, the detritus and gunk builds up in the filter media and starts to increase those phosphate levels, potentially resulting in hair algae growth. Thankfully, this is easy to counter by simply keeping on top of your filter maintenance. I know there's videos online of people who don't do servicing for many months. For me personally, if I skip a month or two, I start to get hair algae in the tank because those phosphate levels increase because of all of the detritus decaying in the filter. Moving on, and I want to talk about suitable plant options because I've had a few questions recently asking about which types of plants people can use with the fish poop fertilization method. As I've shown throughout the video, I keep almost every single category of aquatic plants in my tanks without issue using this method. I've successfully grown slow-grown epiphyte plants, fast-grown stems, fast-grown floating plants, carpeting plants and even rosette plants that were once considered to be heavy root feeders, and they all do perfectly fine. I don't keep many red plants in my tanks right now, but that's mainly because it can be a pain to balance the light intensity in low-tech setups. Getting red plants to develop their colour without triggering algae growth can be tricky in some setups, because if you're not using a CO2 system, the plants can reach their light saturation point too early in the day, so the excess photons bouncing around the tank are used up by algae. That said, I do have some Rotala blood red in a newer tank which I recently set up, which is colouring up really well under an entry level affordable Ciora SR616 light, and I'm really happy and curious how this one develops moving forward. I do also have some Ludwigia Palustra Super Red in one of my newer 12-gallon tanks. It is colouring up reasonably well towards the surface, but Ludwigia being Ludwigia, the lower leaves are starting to melt. That's nothing to do with the light, it's just a Ludwigia thing. It's also worth noting that the light on this specific tank is down to 30% intensity right now because I was dealing with some hair algae. I will be increasing that moving forward to see how high I can get the light intensity without algae outbreaks in this tank, to see how red I can get that Ludwigia using the fish poop fertilization method. The main thing to take from this section of the video is that I honestly think any easy category plant in the hobby can be kept using the fish poop fertilization method, as well as a wide range of medium category plants and even some advanced category plants. Even then, the main reason that the medium and advanced category plants start to have issues is that they are often riparian plants that have to have CO2 systems on the tank for them to grow well, which increases their growth rate, so they tend to need more nutrients. Finally, I want to touch on the role of stocking and bioload, because this was one of my biggest concerns when I switched over to this fertilization method with my planted tanks. As I mentioned earlier in the video, I did expect the low bioload in my betta fish tank to cause nutrient deficiencies in the plant, but that never happened. I also have this newer cherry shrimp tank as well as this newer Entler guppy hybrid tank, which are also low bioload setups. That means I'm really not adding much food because the livestock in these tanks simply don't need it, but as you can see, the plants in them are doing very well. A key thing to take from the Entler guppy tank is that there is a lot of Limnophila sessiliflora in the background of this tank, which is the fastest submerged plant I have ever kept in the hobby by far, but the plant is still doing very well. It's very healthy, its growth rate has slowed right down, so instead of trimming it maybe every week or two in a higher bioload setup, in this one it needs trimming maybe every month or something like that, but as you can see, the plant is still doing very well. It is worth noting that those tanks are newer, neither are even 6 months old yet, so there will still be nutrients in the substrate helping the plants, but I really don't expect things to change moving forward. Like I showed earlier with my betta fish tank, there's Limnophila sessiliflora in there, consistently grown healthily without issue. So in my experience, as long as you're running a low-tech tank without a CO2 system speeding up the plant growth and nutrient demand, the fish poop fertilization method works very well. Not only does it increase the nutrient profile for your fish, shrimp and snails, but like I've shown, there's also plenty of nutrients in their waste to be mineralised by waste-eating bacteria for the plants to use for fertilization. On top of that, because the nutrient levels are lower, there's far less nutrients available for algae to take advantage of, helping to minimise algae growth too. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope it's been helpful. Thanks for watching and good luck with the fish poop fertilization method in your low-tech planted tanks if you decide to give it a try.